Everyone talks about Egwene's strength, her unwavering will, and her incredible power. But what if her meteoric rise wasn't a testament to her genius, but a flaw in the very fabric of the White Tower? We're taking a controversial look at whether Egwene's swift climb was a triumph of ability or a symptom of unprecedented chaos. To answer that, we first need to understand the White Tower as it should be. Not the fractured, fearful institution Egwene encountered, but the rigid, centuries-old machine that prided itself on slow, deliberate progress. For 1,000 years, the path from novice to accepted to Aes Sedai was a marathon, not a sprint. Novices spent years memorizing the histories of the tower, mastering the basics of channeling, never pushing too hard, never straying from the approved weaves, and learning to bow to every Aes Sedai, no matter how young or inexperienced. Accepted faced even stricter trials, the Three Arches, which tested their resolve against fear, temptation, and regret, and a battery of tests that could take months to complete. Even after becoming Aes Sedai, a sister spent decades climbing the ranks of her Aja, navigating the labyrinth of tower politics before she might ever be considered for a position of real power. The tower didn't just train channelers, it trained obedience to a system that valued stability over talent, tradition over innovation. Against that backdrop, Egwene's journey is nothing short of heretical. When she arrived at the White Tower in the Dragon Reborn, she was a farm girl from the Two Rivers, her channeling raw and unrefined, her only real skill a knack for entering Teleran Riod, the world of dreams, without training. A talent the Tower viewed with suspicion, not admiration. By all rights, she should have spent years mopping floors, memorizing scrolls, and being corrected for wasting time on the wolf dream. Instead, she became accepted in months, not years, and Aes Sedai in little more than a year. By the Shadow Rising, she was leading a group of exiled Aes Sedai and novices. By a crown of swords, she was Amyrlin Seat, the leader of the entire White Tower, at a time when most Aes Sedai were still decades away from even sitting on the Hall of the Tower. Not because the Tower suddenly decided to reward talent over tradition, but because the Tower itself was falling apart. The chaos began with Siwan Sanche's deposition, the former Amyrlin accused of consorting with a false dragon. Grand Owl Thor was stripped of her power, stilled, and thrown in a cell. Her replacement, Elaida, Duavrine Aroyhan of the Red Ajar, ruled with fear, purging the tower of anyone who disagreed with her, alienating the Blue Ajar which fled into exile, and turning the Ajars against one another. The tower, once a united front, split into two. Elaida's faction, isolated and paranoid in Tar Valon, and the exiles, led by Siwan and Leane, scattered across the world. To make matters worse, the Seanchan invaded, capturing Aes Sedai and collaring them as Damonai weapons, not sisters, shattering the tower's illusion of invincibility. The traditional system, which had held for a millennium, couldn't survive this. The rules that would have slowed Egwene to a crawl were irrelevant when the tower was fighting for its survival. Egwene's genius wasn't in breaking the rules, it was in thriving when the rules broke down. Let's be clear, Egwene was talented. Her control over Teleran Riod was unmatched. She could weave Saidar with a precision that even seasoned Aes Sedai admired. She had a knack for uniting people, even when they hated each other. But those talents would have been smothered in a functional White Tower. The Red Ajar would have labeled her too close to Rand and sidelined her. The Blue Ajar, while sympathetic, would have insisted she wait her turn. The Hall of the Tower would have dismissed her youth, her Two Rivers roots, her refusal to play by their political games. But in a broken tower, those flaws became strengths. The exiled Aes Sedai, desperate for a leader who could stand against Elaida and the Seanchan, didn't care that Egwene was young. They cared that she was brave, that she knew Rand and could reason with him, that she wasn't afraid to fight. The novices and accepted, tired of being ignored or abused by Elaida's followers, flocked to Egwene because she saw them as equals, not servants. When she was raised Amyrlin, it wasn't because she'd earned the tower's respect through decades of service. It was because the exiles needed a symbol, a figurehead who could rally them, and Egwene was the only one who fit. Even her greatest triumphs were rooted in chaos. When she retook the White Tower from Elaida in Knife of Dreams, she didn't do it through traditional tower politics. She did it by allying with the Seanchan, a move no traditional Amyrlin would ever consider, by using Teleran Riod to outmaneuver Elaida's guards, and by counting on the tower's own divisions to weaken her enemies. It was a brilliant strategy, yes, but it was only possible because the tower was already so fractured that it couldn't defend itself. Critics will argue that Egwene's rise was inevitable. that her strength of will would have broken through the tower's rules no matter what. But let's compare her to Nynaeve, another Two Rivers girl with raw talent, even more powerful than Egwene, and just as stubborn. Nynaeve arrived at the tower around the same time as Egwene, but her journey was far slower. She clashed with the mistresses of novices constantly, refusing to bow to their authority, and was nearly sent away more than once. Even after becoming Aes Sedai, she struggled to gain respect in the tower, dismissed as the wilder from the Two Rivers who didn't understand proper protocol. Why the difference? Because Nynaeve arrived at the tower before the worst of the chaos. She had to navigate the traditional system, and it nearly broke her. Egwene, by contrast, arrived just as the system began to crumble. She didn't have to fight the rules. She just had to step into the void they left behind. Another example, Moiraine Damodre. Moiraine was one of the most talented Aes Sedai of her generation, a blue Aja sister with a sharp mind and a gift for prophecy. But even she spent decades in the tower before she was trusted with important missions. She didn't become a key player in the fight against the Dark One until she was well into her 40s, decades after Egwene had already become Amyrlin. Moiraine's talent was just as great as Egwene's, but she lived in a functional tower where talent alone wasn't enough. She had to wait her turn. This isn't to say Egwene was unworthy of her position. She was a good Amyrlin, maybe even a great one. She united the split tower, ended the Red Aja's blind hatred of male channelers, and led the Aes Sedai into the last battle with courage and wisdom. But her greatness was a response to chaos, not a rejection of order. The White Tower's flaw wasn't that. It ignored talent. It was that it was so rigid, so resistant to change, that it could only adapt when it was on the brink of destruction. Egwene's rise wasn't a triumph of ability over tradition. It was a symptom of a system that had failed so completely that it could no longer function. The tower needed someone like Egwene. Young, flexible, willing to break rules to survive. But if the tower had been working as it should, Egwene would have been a promising novice, not an Amyrlin. She would have learned the tower's ways slowly, refined her talent, and maybe, one day, become a respected Aja head. Her meteoric rise wasn't a testament to her genius. It was a warning. A warning that a system that values tradition over talent, obedience over innovation, will only survive until the first real crisis hits. Let's look at the aftermath of Egwene's reign. After the last battle, the White Tower began to reform. The 3 arches were still required, but novices were allowed to explore their talents, including Teleran Ryode earlier. The Ajars began to work together more, instead of against each other. The Red Aja even began to train male channelers, a move that would have been unthinkable before Egwene. But these reforms weren't because the tower suddenly saw the error of its ways. They were because the tower had been broken, and Egwene had built it back differently. She didn't fix the tower's flaws. She replaced the old system with a new one that was more flexible, more inclusive, but only because the old system had collapsed. In a way, Egwene's rise is a microcosm of the Wheel of Time itself. The world of Rand al'Thor is one that's stuck in a cycle of destruction and rebirth, a world where change only comes after cataclysm. The White Tower is no different. It took a civil war, a seanchan invasion, and the threat of the Dark One to make the tower realize that its traditions were killing it. Egwene was the right leader at the right time. But she was only needed because the tower had failed to produce a leader in the right way. So, was Egwene's rise a triumph of ability or a symptom of chaos? The answer is both. She was talented, exceptionally so, but her talent would have been wasted in a functional White Tower. The chaos of the tower's collapse gave her the chance to shine, to use her gifts in ways the traditional system would have forbidden. But that doesn't diminish her achievement. If anything, it makes it more impressive. She didn't just climb the tower's ranks, she rebuilt the tower itself, turning a broken institution into one that could face the future. The controversy isn't whether she deserved her success, it's whether the system that forced her to succeed in such a chaotic way was ever worth preserving. In the end, Egwene's story isn't just about a farm girl becoming Amyrlin. It's about what happens when a system fails, and when a person has the courage to pick up the pieces. She didn't ask for the chaos, she just refused to let it destroy the tower or herself. Everyone talks about her strength and her will, and they're right too. But we should also talk about the White Tower's flaws, about the system that made her rise necessary. because without that chaos, Egwene Alver might have been just another Aes Sedai, weaving in the shadows of the tower's halls. Instead, she became a legend, not because the system rewarded her, but because she rewrote the rules when the system fell apart. And that, perhaps, is the truest test of genius, not breaking the rules, but knowing when the rules are worth breaking. Egwene Alver's legend as the unexpected Amyrlin begins not in the gilded halls of the White Tower, but in a small, thatched roof cottage on the edge of Emond's Field, where the biggest worries were mending torn dresses and keeping up with the village children. To call her beginnings humble is an understatement. She was a farm girl through and through, her hands rough from helping her mother tend vegetables, her days filled with chasing sheep that strayed from the flock, her nights spent listening to Tamil Thor tell stories of distant lands. She dreamed not of ruling Aes Sedai, but of a quiet life, marrying Rand back when their affection was soft and unspoken, raising a family in the Two Rivers and never straying farther than the westward. That dream shattered the day Moiraine Damodred stepped into the Wine Spring Inn, her blue eyes fixing on Egwene like she saw something no one else could. "You have the spark," Moiraine said, her voice low enough that only Egwene could hear. "Not just to channel Saidar, but to lead. One day the White Tower will kneel to you." Egwene laughed it off then, heat rising in her cheeks. "I'm not leaving the Two Rivers," she told the Aes Sedai. "This is my home." But Moiraine only smiled. "Home is where the pattern leads you," she said, "and it will lead you far from here." At the time, Egwene thought it was just another Aes Sedai's tall tale until Trollocs attacked, until her home burned, until she had no choice but to flee Emond's Field with Rand, Perrin, and Mat. That's when the prophecy stopped feeling like a story. It started feeling like a weight, one she didn't ask for but couldn't shake. The girl who'd once hated the idea of leaving the Two Rivers was now bound to a future she couldn't imagine. A future that would one day make her the most powerful Aes Sedai in the world. Even before the White Tower ever crossed her path, Egwene's raw potential and quiet leadership were sparking to life, hidden in small, unassuming moments. On the road from Emond's Field to Camelin, when Mat grew delirious from the Shadar Logoth dagger, his fever spiking and his words turning to ramblings, the others panicked. Rand paced. Perrin stared at his hands, but Egwene knelt beside Mat, her voice steady as she pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "We'll get you help," she told him, even when she wasn't sure if it was true. She took charge of their supplies, rationing bread and water so no one went hungry. She calmed the horses when they shied at shadows. She even stood up to a band of traveling merchants who tried to cheat them out of coin, her hands on her hips, her voice sharp with the authority of someone who'd never let injustice slide. That was the first glimpse of the leader she'd become, not loud or commanding, but unyielding when it mattered. Her channeling, too, showed promise long before she had a teacher. In the eye of the world, when a pack of wolves surrounded their camp, Egwene felt a hum in her bones, a connection to the weave she didn't understand, and wove a thin shield of air around Rand, protecting him from the beasts. She didn't know how she'd done it, she just knew she had to. Later, when Moiraine tried to teach her the basics of channeling, Egwene picked it up faster than anyone the Aes Sedai had ever seen, her hands moving with a natural rhythm that belied her lack of training. "She doesn't just channel," Moiraine told Lamb privately. "She listens to the weave. That's a gift no training can give." Egwene didn't see it as a gift then. She saw it as another reason she'd never get back to the Two Rivers. But those small sparks, her ability to calm, to lead, to listen to the weave, were already forging the foundation of her future. The catalyst that thrust Egwene into the heart of Aes Sedai politics wasn't a choice she made. It was a crisis. The White Tower forced upon her, starting the moment she stepped through its gates in the Dragon Reborn. The tower she found was not the noble institution Moiraine had described. It was a den of rules and rivalries, where novices were bullied for missteps, where Ajahs spied on one another, and where tradition mattered more than talent. Egwene, with her Two Rivers accent and her refusal to bow to every Aes Sedai's whims, stood out like a flame in a dark room. The mistress of novices, Sheriam Bayana, tried to break her, making her scrub floors until her hands bled, scolding her for wasting time, on Telaran Riod, the world of dreams. But Egwene refused to bend. She snuck into the tower's library at night to read about Telaran Riod, teaching herself to control her visits to the dream world. She defended other novices from bullies, even when it meant more punishment. Her defiance caught the eye of Siwan Sanch, the Amyrlin seat herself. Sjourne saw in Egwene the same fire she'd once had, a refusal to accept the tower's flaws, and took her under her wing. "The tower needs people who question it," Sjourne told her, slipping her a forbidden book on Telar and Riod. "Not just people who obey it." But their alliance didn't last long. When Sjourne was accused of treason for aiding Rand, the dragon reborn, and stripped of her power, the tower split. Aiel do. Flistuan's Aja. Egwene was faced with a choice: stay in the tower and submit to Elida's rule, or flee with the exiled Aes Sedai. She chose to flee. That decision was the moment she stepped into the heart of Aes Sedai politics. The exiled sisters, lost and leaderless, turned to Egwene. Not because she was the most experienced, but because she was the only one who wasn't afraid of Elida, the only one who still believed the tower could be fixed. "You are the only one who can unite us," Sjourne told her, her voice broken but determined. Egwene hesitated. She was still just a girl from the Two Rivers, still learning to channel. But she thought of Moiraine's prophecy, of the Trollocs that had destroyed her home, of the tower that needed saving. He nodded. "I'll try," she said. In that moment, the farm girl from Emond's Field died, and the unexpected Amyrlin was born. Egwene's journey from the Two Rivers to the edge of Aes Sedai power wasn't one she'd chosen. It was one the pattern had woven for her, forged in fire and fear and the quiet courage of a girl who refused to give up. She'd started with nothing but a dream of home and a spark of potential. Now, she stood at the center of a broken tower, facing a fight that would test her in ways she couldn't imagine. The White Tower had underestimated her, seen her as a country girl, a troublemaker, a novice who didn't know her place. But they didn't realize that her Two Rivers roots were her strength. She'd learned to lead not from books or tradition, but from watching her mother care for their family, from standing up for the vulnerable in Emond's Field, from refusing to let chaos break her. The unexpected Amyrlin wasn't just a title. It was a promise. A promise that the tower's old ways were ending, and that something new, something better, was about to begin. And Egwene Alvea was the one who would build it. Egwene's choice to flee the White Tower with the exiled Blue Aja sisters wasn't just a break from tradition. It was the first step in an ascent so rapid it shattered every rule the tower had ever set for power. For a millennium, the White Tower's hierarchy moved like molasses. Novices spent 3 to 5 years mastering the basics, memorizing weaves, studying tower history, perfecting deference, before even being considered for accepted. Accepted endured another 4-6 years of grueling trials, including the 3 arches, which tested their resolve against fear and regret before swearing the 3 oaths and becoming Aes Sedai. And even then, a sister might wait decades, sometimes a century, before earning a seat in her Ajal's council, let alone the hall of the tower. Egwene blew through these stages in less than 2 years. She arrived as a novice in the Dragon Reborn, fumbling with simple airweaves but refusing to be outworked. By the end of that book, she'd passed the accepted tests, skipping months of required drudgery, like scrubbing the tower's stone floors or copying ancient scrolls because the mistresses of novices couldn't ignore her raw skill. By the Shadow Rising, she'd taken the 3 oaths, becoming Aes Sedai at barely 20 in age, when most novices were still being scolded for mispronouncing weave names. And by her crown of swords, just 3 years after stepping foot in Tar Valon, she was raised Amyrlin seat, a position that had never been held by anyone under 100 in the tower's 1,000-year history. To call this pace unprecedented is an understatement. It was heresy, a rejection of the tower's belief that power must be earned slowly, through obedience. But Egwene didn't care about the tower's beliefs. She cared about fixing it. Her ascent wasn't just fast, it was marked by key milestones that turned doubt into respect, even fear, among the Aes Sedai. The first came in the Shadow Rising, when she outmaneuvered Moghedien, a Forsaken, in Telaran Liod. The dream world had long been a source of suspicion for the tower. Most Aes Sedai avoided it, fearing its unpredictability. But Egwene embraced it, teaching herself to manipulate its fabric, turning shadows into shields, turning Moghedien's own weaves against her, until she could trap the Forsaken in a weave of spirit. When she brought Moghedien back to the exiled Aes Sedai bound, powerless and humiliated, The sisters stopped seeing her as a Two Rivers girl and started seeing her as a weapon. She did what we couldn't, seanchan told the hall. She faced a Forsaken and won. The second milestone was her performance in the Three Arches, the final test for accepted in The Dragon Reborn. Most accepted stumble through the arches, confronting visions of lives they could have lived, peaceful, ordinary lives, and breaking under the weight of regret. But Egwene faced hers with unflinching purpose. In one arch, she saw a version of herself who'd stayed in Emond's Field, married Rand, and never channeled. And she rejected it, whispering, "The world needs more than my happiness." In another, she faced the fear of being stilled, having her channeling torn away, and refused to beg for mercy. Sheriam Bayanar, the mistress of novices, later admitted, "I've never seen an accepted so sure of why she's here." The biggest milestone came in Knife of Dreams, when she retook the White Tower from Elaida. She didn't storm the gates with an army, though she had one. She used Teleran Ryod to infiltrate the tower's defenses, convinced Red Aja sisters to switch sides by promising to end the senseless gentling of male channelers, and even negotiated a truce with the Seanchan to focus on the Dark One. When she stood in the hall of the tower, Elaida's former supporters knelt first, and the rest followed. That day, she didn't just become Amyrlin of a unified tower, she became its savior, to ask how. Egwene ascended is to ask how a flame burns. It needs fuel, oxygen, and a spark, and she had all three. Talent was the spark. Her control over Tel'aran'rhiod was innate. She didn't just enter the dream world, she understood it in a way no Aes Sedai before her had. In The Fires of Heaven, she taught other sisters to use the dream world as a battlefield, turning a once suspected ability into a key tool against the Dark One. Her command of Saidar was equally exceptional. She wove with a precision that let her heal wounds other Aes Sedai deemed incurable, like the taint-induced madness in Logain Ablar, and link with dozens of sisters at once, a skill that proved vital in the last battle when she led a circle of 50 Aes Sedai to shield Sheol Ghul from the Dark One's influence. But talent alone wouldn't have gotten her far in a functional tower. It was her sheer force of will that kept her climbing. When Elaida captured her in Knife of Dreams and threw her in a dark cell, depriving her of food and forcing her to channel against her will, Egwene didn't break. She used the time to plan. She communicated with allies in Tel'aran'rhiod by focusing on their faces as she slept, turned one of Elaida's guards to her side by promising to end the tower's cruelty, and even practiced new weaves in her mind so she'd be ready when she escaped. "You don't let a cell define you," she told herself, repeating the lesson her mother had taught her in Emond's Field. "You define what you do next." Finally, there was strategy. Quiet, empathetic manipulation that turned enemies into allies. She knew the tower's greatest weakness was its division. Ajas hated each other, novices feared Aes Sedai, and everyone distrusted outsiders. So she listened. She talked to novices about their fears of harsh punishments, and she changed the rules to end arbitrary beatings. She talked to Red Aja sisters about their guilt over gentling innocent men, and she gave them a new purpose, healing male channelers instead of hurting them. She even talked to Rand, her old friend, about his fear of the tower, and promised him the Aes Sedai would stand with him, not against him. This wasn't trickery. It was leadership. She didn't demand loyalty. She earned it by seeing the tower's people, not just its politics. Egwene's rapid ascension wasn't a fluke. It was the result of a girl who refused to let tradition limit her, who turned her weaknesses, her youth, her Two Rivers roots into strengths, and who saw the tower not as a place of rules, but as a place of people. For a millennium, the tower had believed power came with time. Egwene proved it came with purpose. When she stood in the White Tower's courtyard after the last battle, watching sisters of all Ajas laugh together, she thought of the farm girl she'd been, chasing sheep, mending dresses, dreaming of a quiet life. That girl was still there, in the way she'd cared, in the way she listened. But she was also the Amyrlin seat, the unexpected Amyrlin who'd turned a broken institution into a force for good. Her timeline of power wasn't just a list of promotions. It was a proof, sometimes. The fastest way to fix what's broken is to stop following the rules and start leading.